This is Photoville Educator Lab 2024, Catalyst for Change. We'll be exploring visual storytelling and civics. It couldn't be more appropriate for this time. I had that in mind about a year ago when I was starting to think about what should we talk about, right? Like last year we talked about social emotional learning at the intersection of arts integration. We've been through a lot. We've been through a lot with COVID, the election, all of the things, lots of changes. And so it's good to start with what is media literacy? What is the way in which we make meaning of all the things that we're being bombarded with on Instagram, on TikTok, the various social media platforms? How do we make meaning of it for ourselves? And then how do we impart a set of tools that young people can look at the world through? It doesn't mean that you'll maybe remember all of the things, but some of the frameworks that will be shared today and some of the examples hopefully will challenge you to dig deeper, even understanding that you guys are inundated with so much. And it's an introduction and invitation for you to check out some of the resources that are out there related to media literacy, visual media literacy, and also civics, right? The way that beyond taking a picture, which can be a form of a call to action, how can our students look at issues that may be impacting their day-to-day lives in their neighborhoods, and how to, whether it's signing up for a voter registration or doing a letter writing campaign to address the carceral state. These are just examples of ways that beyond taking pictures, one can get involved in their community. The Educator Lab is a space of collaboration, community, and possibility. And I want to stress collaboration, community, and possibility because it's going to take us collectively visioning with our students and with each other to get to this next space that is coming forth. We're going to have to dig deep and also understand that, yes, we're individuals, but we're a part of and connected to each other always. I'll leave us with a quote from Bell Hooks, which is, I feel like, the central theme that I was thinking about when looking at the frameworks and things that I would love to explore today. The heart of justice is truth telling, seeing ourselves in the world the way it is rather than the way we want it to be. More than ever, before we, as a society, need to renew a commitment to truth telling. And so as we look at all of the changes that have happened in our society over the last few years, I hope that that quote resonates in terms of the truth telling, in terms of whatever your beliefs are, having a connection to humanity first, and that through that empathy and her, what she's talking about in terms of justice, you making meaning of that for yourself. So without further ado, I will kick this over to Barnabas Crosby. We could give him a round of applause.
Good morning, good morning. How's everybody doing? All right, so let's see if this works. Okay, if you have a pen, paper, coffee cup especially, let's put that down. All right. Let's just see if this works, because it doesn't always work. Everybody clap once, clap once, clap twice. Let's try that one more time. Let's be tight. Clap once, clap twice. Little sharper, a little faster. We're gonna do it one more time. We're gonna make it great. Clap once, clap twice. Awesome. All right. So my name is Barnabas. I'm a former classroom teacher. I actually have a theater background, and I'm also an image maker. So a lot of what my work is based on is, well, let me talk about my theater work and how that relates to photography. So I spent a lot of time in dark rooms writing stories that would appear in a box. Later on, I went to study dramaturgy, which really kind of dives into the world that exists behind the box, if that makes sense. So I'm really concerned about not just the story, but the world that makes the story possible. So slowly, I went into the classroom eventually. I was there for about 10 years, working with young people, hoping to kind of take some of that story telling, the world of the story, my obsession with story in the world could come into the classroom in ELA. and that work that I would do with young people. Um, Eventually, I picked up the camera. It was like really like a revisit because my friends had been taking photos and I'd been assisting them on photo shoots, but I never was really concerned about taking my own photos. I was very intimidated by the SLR, very intimidated. But then I said, hey, man, I bought one of the most complicated cameras to learn how to use, and I figured it out. So here I am talking to you guys about my journey and how I actually look at images. Okay. So what we're going to talk about is visual media literacy. If we can come to the next slide. But we have to break it down in a couple different ways because visual media literacy, that's a big, huge thing. Has anybody ever seen this photo before? You guys, I've never seen this. I don't even know that I really knew what Helen Keller actually looked like. But when I was doing my research for this project and I saw this photo of this person and I found that it was Helen Keller, I said I have to include that into my presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about why this image is really vital to this presentation. Next slide, please. So, what some of our mission objectives today is that we're going to look at, we're going to identify primary types of communication because photography, communication is one type of communication. We're going to define visual communication, media literacy, and visual media literacy. And we're going to explore different ways that we're going to analyze these images as a way to kind of be objective, a way for us to just see, notice what's going on in the image, and walk slowly away from this "I like it, I don't like it" kind of language that a lot of our young people get stuck in. So that binary language, we want to move away from that. Um, we're going to create practical ways to bring visual media literacy into the classroom as well. I'm seeing some of my friends walk into the room. This is like really, really funny to me. Because, yeah, some people are here that I didn't anticipate being here, but now that they're here, it's all the better. Next slide as well. So I'm interested to know, we're going to do a little bit of popcorn. What was the last image that you saw that really kind of just struck you? Something that was really, really remarkable, whether you saw it. Well, let's just talk about it. Was there any image that you guys noticed very recently that really kind of gave you a little bit of pause and made you take note?
Do you mean from this or from our lives?
From your lives, very recently, the most recent.
Will last night do? Okay, so last night on PBS there was a new documentary about the coup, American coup, that occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. And they included historical images. One of them was in front of one of the building in Wilmington after the coup had taken place, where there was a duly elected African American officials, and at gunpoint they all had to resign to be replaced by white supremacy guys. And they all took a big picture together in front of the building, which was very reminiscent of the lynching photos that were made at the time. So all the boys got together, very proudly, smiling, looking right at the camera. They committed a lawless act, Class A act, and they were very proud of what they had done in the newspapers and everything.
So you said newspapers published that image.
Yeah, no, it was for publication, yes. So I don't know if they published that particular image, so I can't guarantee that, but it was taken. So it was probably mailed out in postcards, because they very much were trying to echo the lynching photos of the time. In fact, they made a point of it in the commentary in the documentary.
I love that. That story sticks with me as well, because I do know a little bit about that story. So I'm glad you brought that up. Anybody else? An image that you saw very recently? Yes.
My students are working on a photojournalism project, and so we're looking at a number of sources. One of the things we did was look through National Geographics, and there was this story that really sort of took everyone, or moved everyone. There was a face transplant from somebody who had been, she went through a number of things, but the image of her in surgery, you see this face just sitting there, about to be transplanted, and it's really striking and gory and moving, because you know that this is going to change this person's life for the better, and yet it's incredibly difficult for a lot of the students and myself to look at.
And what grade are your students, just out of curiosity?
High school.
So they could process something like that a little bit more. All right, let's take two more. Yes, sir.
Yes, I recently saw a Gladiator 2 with Denzel Washington and Pedro Pascal. Amazing. But at one image, for example, specifically with Denzel, I found his role to be great. I'm not spoiling it, but it taught me about politics and how it really works sometimes. So that was enough for me.
I think that film is interesting because it is a historical reference, which is an image in itself, and then to kind of peel back the layer and add those politics to it, the image, the historical reference, and the political stuff. It's really interesting. One more. Yes.
Excuse me, I saw a photo of a police officer kneeling at a coffin with an American flag because his canine died. So the American flag, the police officer, his grief over losing a dog, and how all that impacts me, the American flag, police. And I guess I get it, losing a dog is hard, but how much police would care for their dog over, say, me or my black son.
Really brings up an alarming question about the value of life. Very much so. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about visual communication. I think it's important that we try to define what we think it is. So we understand that visual communication is one of the four main types of communication. There is a fifth, which is debatable. We'll talk about that fifth, but there are four primary types of of communication. Visual communication is all about the transmitting of messages using imagery. Visual communication is very important. So we're going to explore how important these things are. So if we could just do like another quick popcorn, what do we think visual communication is? Visual communication, what do we think it is? No rights, no wrongs. Yes, sir.
um, kind of like you're watching someone, let's say if they're choking or they're sad or happy, they're visually communicating their emotions and then internalize. And when you see that, then you can make from your own deduction what's going on. So that's what I think.
Somebody from over here. Yes.
Yeah. Seeing a picture or event take place and whatever your individual perception of what happened, tells a story.
Okay. One more.
So I was gonna say earlier, which relates to this, so now I guess I'll just say it. There's a photo of me in the protests in the beginning, where I'm being, in this sense, it actually turned out to be an arrest. So I'm being arrested, and I'm crying. And underneath is like what the journalist said, which was a complete lie. It was like something about losing my husband in a crowd. It was completely made up, which was not the case. I was upset because my friend was already arrested and here I was. So I think the picture itself, if it didn't have any context provided by the journalist, would have had a lot stronger of a visual communication. But oftentimes we're told different stories.
That's interesting. I want to actually pick up on you were getting ready to add something.
Yeah, visual communication to me is communicating an idea or a message through imagery. Still,
Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So the types of communication that we're going to outline, the four primary, which is verbal. This is any type of communication that happens maybe over the phone, face to face, virtual, which is very recent for us. Within the last, I guess, 15 or 20 years, chatting or communicating where verbal expression is exchanged. I may be telling my age, but do you guys remember that show where like the girl used to talk to her dad through the crystal? Oh, what is that called? Out of This World. That was one of my favorite shows. Nonverbal communication, which is facial expressions, posture, eye contact, hand movement, touch, and nonverbal cues. What's ironic is when I was in the classroom, I designed a curriculum for young people. I don't know if you guys know, but during adolescence, you actually lose the ability to read faces. And this is some of the earlier signs of empathy when you're able to read face. Because if I can mimic your face, I know how you feel. But when we put the masks on, that kind of distorted that a little bit. A little bit. Visual, which is visual images such as photographs, memes, videos, image-only platforms used to convey meaning or to communicate messages. Instagram is pretty much an image-only platform versus like Facebook. You can put some words to it. Written communication, emails, memos, a report, social media posts, and other forms of written communication. Let's go to the next slide. And then also listening. I spent a lot of my youth, in retail. A client comes in, they say what they want. I have to kind of do a whole lot of listening in order to meet their needs and them to walk away with what they're actually wanting. So some people are saying that listening is actually another form of communication, or active listening more specifically. Next slide. So in this video, am I media literate? We're going to just explore some of the understanding and practice of media literacy and why it's important. This video encourages us to do a reflection on our current media literacy skills and explores new methods for analyzing images. Okay, and so we're going to actually run that video, and then we're going to explore some reflections after that.
Am I media literate? Remember the joy you felt when you read your first book? Remember how exciting it was when you could write your name? Those skills of reading and writing are crucial to your success in school and throughout your whole life. People who can read and write are called literate. The same is true about the skills required to think carefully about the media you see, hear, and read. This is called media literacy. Media literacy is something that can be learned and practiced. All you need to do is answer the questions in your media literacy skills toolbox. Do you know how to access reliable sources of information? Look for evidence and facts from multiple media sources. This will help you corroborate or support your information. Have you taken time to closely examine the information you find? It always helps to investigate the media source to discover who created it and why. A smart media consumer uses skills to escape misinformation. Do you know how to stay safe online? Can you identify phishing schemes? And do you avoid clicking on suspicious links? Be sure you stay safe by keeping your personal information to yourself and by being careful about what you post or download. Are you responsible when you are creating media? Do you verify the accuracy of content before you post and share it? A smart media producer makes sure their media is based on fact and is not harmful to anyone. Do you take time to reflect on the sites you rely upon to get your news? Do you consider the message and meaning of the posts or videos you create and share? Be aware that your media presence says a lot about you. Finally, do you set a good example for your friends and family when it comes to consuming or producing media? Be a role model for responsible media use by showing kindness and civility in your interactions. Acting responsibly with the media takes practice. The next time you produce or consume media, ask yourself, am I being media literate?
All right. So some questions that before I actually dive in, any reflections on what we just saw? Anything standing out? Yes.
I think the idea of like fact checking and looking that our sources are actually right is super important. Even someone who's like within like the photography realm, we can with social media and how we're like bombarded. Sometimes it's easy to like reshare something, thinking like, oh, that's a crazy information, and then it just kind of snowballs. We realize maybe it's
So I think that's really awesome just to think about like as a best practice, doing like the fact checking. Because I think that's interesting with and what's your name, sir? Adam. I think that's interesting that Adam brought up the reference of the South Carolina photo, North Carolina photo. And if you guys are noticing, I'm fact checking with him in real time. Am I accurate? Am I saying the correct thing, right? And also which is corroboration, which is one of the key things that they said. But doing that fact check and my friend sitting back here in the sweater at the table. Yes. Yeah. What's your name? Dana. So I think Dana's example of her experience with the photograph that stuck out for her, I think, is really, really interesting because she was the primary source in that photo. So she could cooperate with herself. Are you married, Dana?
No.
Okay.
And it
So
wasn't at the time.
she's what
And
she.
didn't lose anybody in the crowd. And actually, at the time, I was asked, the journalists were screaming at me, like, what's your name? We're gonna help you get representation. And so they were asking me what was happening. So they knew. But I think they chose a different story because the story I was sharing didn't fit whatever image and whatever they wanted to portray. And
So
I reached out to the newspaper. It was in the newspaper. That's how I found it.
So I think a word that I was used. I don't know what word comes to mind when you guys think about how she was actually treated in that moment. She was used, and that would make a person feel a little bit of distrust in the media source. Okay,
I would say harm as well.
and harmed. Yes.
Well, I just wanted to share too about what you referred to with social media. It's almost, you have to be so aware now because what happened recently in Amsterdam, how it was portrayed in The Guardian and NPR and like sources that we would trust completely misrepresented what happened and how people from Israel were attacking people in Amsterdam and like kind of instigated this whole thing, and then The Guardian and NPR started the story after people started protecting themselves and retaliating against that violence. So, and you could only see that through user created media. So it's almost like the opposite. What you're saying is absolutely true, but we have to be aware of when we have to use social media to corroborate media sources.
Yeah, and that goes back to the first question that we have to ask is like what's reliable here, because we all know when we saw like the uprising that happened during 2020, the truth that we saw actually came through social media. So, go ahead.
So I want to say something about what you just shared about, like I always say, like context is everything. And so I teach health equity, and a lot of times I'm always asking, like, where in the life cycle of this story did you find this piece? Because the time, place, and circumstance matters 100%. And so part of it is also like you see, kind of like if you were watching a blip, like the surge of responses, the surge of like people got mad or pissed or whatever, and it's like, where in that story did this happen? When did you find this piece out? What are you actually reacting to? And that is so critical because that's how like a lot of the misinformation gets transferred without any context related to it.
There was a recent incident. Legendary hip hop artist was assaulted a couple weeks ago, and a lot of people were really, really impacted by the visuals that came through social media. And there was a lot of outcry for how we should not just treat the person who was assaulted, but the assailants who actually did the assaulting. And then all these other videos would come out subsequently that kind of painted a different narrative about what we actually saw and how people were kind of speaking out against the incident. So the more information that you have allows you to kind of adjust the ways in which you kind of see and make your opinions. Yes.
Well, one thought that occurs to me is the video is a little dated for the world we're entering and what's coming, bringing up AI. That, one of the things people have been talking about in general is trust between human beings breaking down, and AI potentially is a great way to help destroy that, because if it's going to get to the point where we don't know if what we're looking at is actually a photograph of something that actually happened or was manufactured by someone with an agenda, and how do we know? Or are we talking to a human being, or are we talking to a AI algorithm. So it'll make it's raising up the whole issue of what is real, and how can we use our skills to determine that? How do we navigate a world and be literate?
Well, if I could remix that, I would say, what is truth? That would be a question for me because we understand that sometimes truth is very malleable in a lot of situations. Go ahead.
To sort of add to his point, we've the truth has always been in question as long as photography has been around. AI is just putting the cherry on the top of everything, and it's making us do that. But we should have been questioning photography since the beginning, since the 1840s. So AI is sort of serving that purpose. Is now telling everybody that we need to question what we look at and not take everything at face value.
That's brilliant. Can we go to the next slide? And I have you. So a lot of I think what's interesting about media literacy as a definition, and this is a definition that's provided through the National Association of Media Literacy, is that media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. Ignore my typo, please. Can we move to the and if you look at this photo, if we can go back just a little bit, when we look at what these individuals are doing, they are participating in the in a communication practice. Okay, so the one thing that I do want to kind of like emphasize in our looking at these definitions is that communication piece. What are we actually putting out and what we're actually receiving? Let's go to the next slide because it is a bit of a language. Okay, so a basic definition: the ability to read, write, and create visual images. It is a concept that relates to art and design, but also has a much wider application. Visual literacy is about the language, communication, and interaction. Visual media is a linguistic tool with which we communicate, exchange ideas, and navigate our complex world. I have a adult niece, my brother's oldest daughter, who I talk to very, very sparingly. And we get on FaceTime, and I have small children. And my 8-year-old daughter is in the background doing something over my shoulder, and I can't figure out. I'm looking at the phone, and my 8-year-old daughter is doing something over my shoulder, and I impatiently tell her to stop. But my niece on the phone says, "Oh, you don't know what she's doing." And then they started doing some synchronized dance that I don't know about because that's not a part of my culture. That's not a part of my visual awareness. So that communication, that language, I could not speak between those two people. And they were of different generations as well. All right, let's go to the next slide. So according to John Debs, he's the founder. Is it Debs? Debs? Debs. He's the founder of the International Visual Literacy Association. So in 1969, he says visual literacy refers to a group of vision competencies a human being can develop by seeing and at the same time having and integrating other sensory experiences. So not just what you see with your eyes, but what you may have smelled in your history, what you may have heard in your history, you may have tasted in your history. Someone asked Denzel Washington, do you think someone else could have made Schindler's List other than Steven Spielberg? He says, well, there are certain cultural implications of that film that I don't necessarily relate to. And the reference that he uses, we know what the smell of a hot comb smells like, and that's a cultural relevance. So that's something that we're going to actually touch on in a minute. So when developed, they enable a visual literate person to discriminate and interpret the visible actions, objects, symbols, natural or man-made that he encounters in his environment. Through the creative use of these competencies, he is also able to communicate with others. Through the appreciative uses of these competencies, he's able to comprehend and enjoy the masterworks of visual communication. Think about food photography. Oh my goodness, how well that works. Right? Give me out buying a burger, right? if you will eat burgers. Some of you guys, you have your feelings and thoughts about that. I'm not going to debate it. I love a steak. Next slide, please. So we want to have some way to analyze images. We want to have some sort of framework. We don't want to just bring all of this objectivity, all of this like and dislike to our analysis of images. So this is a framework that we're going to use for this activity. You guys are going to engage in an activity. So the SIFT method, which is to stop, investigate, find better coverage, which is some of you guys provided those examples in your sharing of the images that you guys recently saw. Trace claims, quotes, and media to the origin. Where did I get this from? Where did you get this from? We had a lot of challenges a couple years ago where tweets would go out and they say, "Oh, I got that from my friend. I thought it was cool." And it did harm, right? And we learned from the video, the media should do no harm. And the young people, I think that's one of the things when we're talking about this language that we're establishing, the young people don't always understand that these things do harm, right? I grew up, I actually was born in that bridge generation, analog and digital. So somebody might say something in the digital sphere and then somebody will come to see you. We don't always have those type of experiences where our young people are concerned, but some people, they still operate in that analog kind of way. So we want to be protective of them in that way. So give them some best practices where creating media is concerned. Also, the CRAP method. CRAP. Currency, the timelines of the information. You guys spoke to that. Relevance. How does this information fit your needs? Somebody was taken advantage of in a photo by a journalist who had a need that they were trying to fill. So their practice did someone else harm. If not physical harm, it may have caused some emotional disruption, some sort of disruption in that regard. The authority, the source of the information. I think we're all going to find challenges with that right there, the authority of the information. I come from the world of museum work as well. And so those questions are always coming up. Who has the authority to tell this story? Right? And we're going to explore that in a little bit. Accuracy, reliability, and the correctness of the information. And then finally, purpose, the reason the information exists. In North Carolina, these guys wanted to show the spoils of their war. Right? Look what we took. Okay? All right, so next slide. So you guys are gonna work in small groups. You guys are actually gonna work in clusters. We're gonna go out into the lobby. You guys are gonna view a set of images. You guys are gonna have Post-it notes in hand, a writing utensil in hand, and you guys are gonna offer up reflections to what you all see. Okay? And these are going to kind of service as AI prompts. We're existing in this world where images have to be are being created in that realm. So we want to see how those things are coming out. But actually, if you guys have not yet created AI images generated through AI, just offer up a reflection. Okay, so I'll take it easy on you guys and not offer up anything too specific. Okay, and I don't want you guys to share your prompts. I just want you guys to offer up a reflection via the Post-it note. In the images, what were some of the things that you guys noticed? Go ahead.
So, one of the images I noticed, like old school vintage. What I noticed.
What was in the image?
The family with the dogs. So they had one black family with all the children and the dog, and then you had one lady who was white, and she just her and her dog.
What? Okay. Anybody else?
Somebody back here, I think, his name's Patrick, I think. We just noticed that you
You needed to get close to really see what was going on. It was hard to just stand back. You needed to get really close and look at it to really see. And to his point too, it seemed like images of things that we don't see every day. So you really needed to like stop and stare.
Brittany, you said images that you don't see every day. Break that down.
Yeah, so I mean, we had images from a time that we don't live in. People are wearing different clothes. They're sitting in front of buildings that we don't necessarily like. They looked older. They're also just black and white. We don't see a lot of black and white in our visual media every day. And then there were the photos that were a little bit out of focus, and so you really needed to get close because our eyes want to focus.
3 and then 4.
There was a lot of, the photos were very clearly picked to be put next to each other because there was a lot of similarities between the photos, either visually or in terms of sort of the content of them, but with noticeable differences between them.
What were some noticeable differences that you spotted in the images that you?
Sure. So in, I would say, 2 of the 3, let's call them panels, in 2 of the 3 panels, one of the main difference would be the race of the subjects who are being depicted. I would say the 2 color photos that played with light, I think the context is visually they were similar, but the context seemed opposite. Yeah.
And there was also in the panel I spent the most time on was with the one with the candles, and there was an ambiguity in the picture because it was upside down, and there was a tendency to want to flip it over and make it correct. And my opinion was this is how it's presented, and how are we dealing it with it how it's presented, rather than our tendency to try to fix things, because we have that sort of nature in ourselves to like make things right, and maybe even do things unilaterally, like rather than like, well, let's discuss this the way it's given to us, rather than like, let's fix it, And so I thought that is, I don't know if it was a test or something like that, but I thought I used it as a test of that that idea. So
I think that's interesting. Really, especially for our young people, their eyes are so fresh, and the impression is not there. So sometimes when they see things, sometimes the investigation needs to really say like, well, how are you seeing it? Why are you seeing it in this way? Where have you seen a different orientation of that thing that you're witnessing that has a familiarity? Yes.
Yeah, one of the things that, thank you. Our group was looking at the 2 photos from that we determined were World War II based, and they were airmen. And one of our group introduced the idea that one of them could be AI, and then suddenly none of it made sense. Like everything was questionable after that. We were looking then to see, is this real? Is this authentic? And that sort of changed my relationship with the images. Instead of just trying to see what the story was, but trying to figure out who made this and why. And it kind of made the ground shake a little bit for me as a visual story. You were in our group too.
Yes, I was in the same group, and I felt the same. I also work a lot with archival material, and I thought because both images were printed on glossy paper and I couldn't see the archive traces and feel the actual paper, it also led me to like this like physical experience of the photograph, like questioning, is it real or not?
Can we actually go back 2 slides if we could? Go forward. So it's interesting that you said that idea about, the paper, that here we have this additional sensory awareness, the additional sensory competency that we're bringing into our awareness, our literacy, right? So I think that's an interesting point that you're making. And then we'll take this last one and we're going to move forward.
Thank you. Looking at some of the images that clearly evoked a past, like what looks like the Tuskegee Airmen, or looks like a picture from the Harlem Renaissance over there, it made me think again about how important it is for our generation now to get out of our lives and our relationship with cameras. So right now, as we're speaking, a zillion pictures of us are being taken by this camera. And everywhere we walk around, it's like an Orwellian thing. We're sort of getting used to being watched all the time. And of course, if you have taking a picture of your baby, you can take 20 million digital pictures. But for them, this could be the most important picture of their lives. There might be like 1 or 2 or 3, 5 pictures taken in their whole lifetime. And that their relationship with the camera is very different from the one that we have today. And that's something we need to take into context.
I think that's interesting. This is a bit of an anecdote. So last year I bought a Holga camera. You guys, anybody know what a Holga is? So I bought a Holga camera thinking I'm gonna do some amazing things with this Holga, and I ended up wasting a lot of money on trying to make this thing right. Anybody who does not know what a Holga is? So a Holga is like this little plastic camera. There's no sophistication to it whatsoever, and you're either disciplined or you're just like not. And so you should be disciplined with the Holga, but it's really a practice. It's really a practice. So I bought this Holga. I'm walking around with it. I come outside. I'm getting ready to jump in my car, and I see my neighbor, and he has his son. And I said, you know what? Let me just see if I can get something good. So I said, hey, and he's a recent neighbor. I said, do you mind if I take a photo of you? Like, yeah, sure. So I take the photo, and I said, can I take another? He said, yes. I took another one because I don't know. Like, the Holga is just really like a crapshoot. And I'm gonna try my best to hold it together. So this was, say, maybe in March. I took this photo. I live in Flatbush, and I've been trying to make it a point to photograph Juve every year. But I'm from Ohio, and and my sister's birthday is August 31st. So I always lose. I've been for the last 2 years. I've lost the battle of let's travel back to make Juve. My daughter has a will that is like unmatched by anything, right? So I come back this year from the holiday, and I see my neighbor's wife, right? And I speak to her. I say, "Hey, how you doing?" She says, "I haven't seen you in a couple days. I've been looking for you." I said, "Yeah." She says, "My husband passed away." What's ironic is I bought a car, and this guy had his car, the same car, but he had it done the way that I wanted to. So he and I would build on that, right? She said, "My husband passed away." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Yeah." She said, "You took a photo of him." I said, "I did." She said, "I would like that photo." I said, "I'll print it out for you." I just bought a printer too. And my partner, she's been negotiating the value of all this money I've been spending on photography equipment and printers. She just couldn't. She just can't always understand it until moments like these, right, where I'm presenting and all this other stuff. And she was with me when this woman spoke to me, and she says, "I get it now. This crappy file that was blurry, that was double exposed. I put it on nice paper, but in that moment, I realized the tool does not matter. It doesn't. What really matters is the artifact. Something that somebody could put into their hands and say, wow, this was my dad, this is my uncle, or whatever. So the sensory, and I made sure that I put it on good paper because I wanted her to have the sense that I really cared about not just my work, but who was in the work and her husband simultaneously. So, that's that. Can we move maybe 2 slides forward? All right. So this is, what do you guys think when you guys think of a pit bull? What comes to mind? Best doggy ever. I love you. Anybody else? Pity from the Little Rascals. Dog fights. Anybody else? Aggressive. Anybody else? DMX. DMX. You want to growl for me? No, no. But yeah, so now we're going to talk about visual literacy, and what I think is important to note is that we talk about cooperation with other sources of media. We're talking about anchoring it down in history or whatever. So if you're going to do this kind of work with your students, like I said, I come from the world of dramaturgy. So it's not just about the location, but it's like, how did people get there? Who's living in those buildings? What are they seeing from from their vantage point, right? So those various perspectives, those various media sources, all of those facts and details, they all matter, right? So when we look at this thing here, we're in New York, we're in Pittsburgh, we're in Cincinnati, and we're selling dogs. This is a black and white image. It looks like some sort of advertisement of some kind. So we're selling dogs in newspapers. We're selling dogs in publications. Why are we selling a dog? Because it's man's best friend. It's also a woman's dog. It's also a child's dog. It's also a great watchdog, right? And we're selling dogs. Can anybody guess when this photo may have been taken or this advertisement may have been made? 1940s, 1950s, we don't know, but clearly we know something. It was a photograph, yeah? So we know that it was taken sometime after photography was invented. Let's move forward. So the pit bull actually came to the United States somewhere in the 1800s. We're going to move to the next slide. So this is not, DMX wasn't the first person to own a pit bull, ironically enough. He didn't make that dog. You like to corroborate that, right? He didn't make that dog. So it came over from the 1800s, and this dog was actually bred to fight. This activity here is called bull baiting. You see those little things flying in the air? Those are pit bulls. And this is what they were bred for, right? And they were trained, you take a bulldog and a terrier, you mix it together, and now you have this super tenacious, muscular dog that just, let's move to the next slide, that just want to please you, and just want to love you. These are the descriptions of a pit bull. The American Pit Bull Terrier, usually friendly. They have a reputation as a violent type, and that can be unfair. Right? So the question is like from the 1930s to the 1980s, what happened? Next slide. What you guys don't know is that the pit bull was America's watchdog. You can see this dog in all types of advertisements. Somebody said Petey the Pit Bull, right? And the Little Rascals was 1930s. World War II started when? 1939. Okay? So during that time between 1910 and 1970, we had two world wars. We had two groups of black Americans move up from the South. The first set went to my place of origin, the Midwest, World War I. The second set, World War II. And all the while, these black Americans were thinking, like, wouldn't it be great if I could fully take part in the American dream? What better way to do that than to purchase America's watchdog? Why? Because it's loyal. It's not actually a breed of dog. It's actually a classification of physical characteristics. Makes it hardier, more resilient, all of these different things. It was a general purpose dog used for all things. So why would that not be America's dog? Okay? But during that time, we had the Great Migration. You had a lot of ascension, economic ascension for black Americans. Let's move to the next slide, which made it a little weird, right? So we had blacks go to the West Coast during World War II, which was 1940 to 1970. World War II was not 1970s, by the way. 1915 and 1940s, we have to the Midwest. Next slide, please. So we had these two cultural things that are happening at the same time. We have these world wars, and we have this huge movement. About 6 million people moved from the southern United States up to the out west and up to the northern part of the United States. We had a large movement of people come from one place to the next place. How are we going to feed all those people? How are we going to house all these people? How are we going to take care of all those people? And what happens to the people who are already there? Now, if you guys remember from that first advertisement, what cities, where were we? Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. Are those rural areas? These are urban metropolitans. Pitbull was an urban dog. And when blacks moved up from the South, they didn't go to the rural areas. They went where they can have the most economic advantage. So they went to cities. And when they went to cities, they got a city dog. So they just was like, yo, we just doing what they do. Okay? But what happened as a result? We have some conflicts with the people, not the dog, with the people. But if we can get rid of the dog, maybe we can get rid of the people. If we can control the dog, maybe we can control the people. Okay? So in this text, Art on My Mind, Bell Hooks talks about this photograph that she found of her father. This photograph was of her father as a young man. He was in a pool hall. He had no kids. He was smiling, smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer. Next slide, please. Now, what was interesting about this photograph is that there were very, very different thoughts and opinions about this photograph. Bell Hooks thought, wow, I've never seen my dad like this. This is so amazing. Her sister says, he doesn't even have on a shirt. So the perceptions of their father were very, very different. Similarly to how we have very different perceptions of this thing. So one person was walking with one idea, another person is walking with another idea, and somehow over this artifact, they come to clash. This artifact, this photograph of that really kind of holds the seat of conflicting ideas. Okay? We think about this photograph that we talked about in North Carolina. Look at what we did. We've won. We're victorious. But there are a lot of people who were harmed on the back end of that. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this photograph, what's the date on this photograph? 1949. I don't know if you all know where we were in the country during that time in 1949. Yes, we were coming off the heels of a Second World War. We were smack dab in the middle of Jim Crow as well. So to find a photograph of a black man leisurely, smiling at a pool hall, carefree, is very rare. Very rare. Not only that, but there was an image, James Baldwin talks, well, not James Baldwin, but W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the double consciousness that a lot of black Americans walk around with. This is like the idea of how I see myself and my awareness to how the world sees me. Okay? So these are some things that were not present in this photo, this double consciousness. This was away from, as she talks about, away from their mother, their children, anything that would anchor it down that would change his appearance of himself. And what she's bringing to our attention is the fact that there are photos that others take of us, and then there are photos that we take of ourselves. The photos that others take of us, as Dana explained, sometimes they cause harm if they're delivered and showcased in the wrong context. The photos that we take of ourselves, hopefully, they show us in a better light, a more accurate light, closer to the truth. But we don't, the truth is debatable. Okay? So whether or not her sister liked this photograph or Bell Hooks hated the photographs, those things are irrelevant. Because to look back at a photograph from 1949 and to be able to ask all these questions, it gives us a different way to kind of view the photograph. Like some of you guys said, some of the photographs you had a departure from the photograph because there were some things that you just couldn't make sense of. You could not make peace with. Okay, can we go to the next slide? And then, bell hooks in this text, we talk about the misrepresentations that come from outside sources that have documented the culture. I have a pit bull. I don't know if I said that. I have a pit bull. And I gave my pit bull to my 8-year-old daughter when she was 2.5. I have a 2-year-old son. And this dog and my son have been thick as thieves since since we brought my son home. So I have some really, really interesting photos of my pit bull that I'm sure would disrupt a lot of the dominant narratives that have been floating around about the pit bull. Next slide. So as we start to wrap up and close, keep going. I want to just kind of make sure that you guys are, here we are, go forward. We're kind of left with some things, because we do want to offer our students some tools. We want to offer our students some practical ways to kind of view and analyze photography, not just in the way, or just visual media as a whole. We want them to be literate. We want them to be able to write and read. So if you guys have not necessarily made a note of these two methods, I invite you all to do it. The SIFT message: stop, investigate, find better coverage, trace claims, quotes, and medias to the origin. What you guys have talked about early on in the hour about photos that stuck out to you, and then the CRAP method: CRAP, currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So these are the things that we want to offer our students to keep them objective when they're looking at photographs, and just to be able to dig deeper when they're trying to make sense of the images that they're taking. Does that make sense? All right. And yes, one last.
I just wanted to maybe take note that sometimes it's not so obvious. So, for example, I introduce Dawood Bey's work in my classroom, so high school students, and it's not clear what's actually being depicted. And so often it's like it's not photojournalism, well, it's storytelling, but it's not photojournalism. But there is this sense of feelings versus facts. So this doesn't really apply, and it's really like studying the image and thinking about form, thinking about maybe content, context, but more from a different approach. So this doesn't really apply.
I think that's valuable, because it still makes the educator ask the question and present the question to their students of when is this reliable? Okay, and maybe it's not reliable in all situations. Dawood Bey's work is a perfect example. So it may not always be possible. All right, and then the last thing I do want to say, it is my birthday.
Woo! Happy birthday, Barnabas.
All right, and so this was a wonderful birthday gift to be able to present to you. Is your birthday too? Yeah.
Happy birthday. We got some Scorpios up in here. Scorpios.
All right, and so and as we make our transitions to our next presenter, or are we taking a break?
No. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you. We're wrapping up right now, but I wanted to end on a note of Barnabas. Thank you so much for creating such a beautiful container for us today on your birthday, a Scorpio. We're going to make sure that we give that front and center. Your background has really supported us to be able to be curious. And while these frameworks, this is just an example. This is an introduction. It's an invitation for you to find frameworks or even develop your own framework, right? That maybe fit the different scenarios where we are asking our students to sit with images, right? We have to acknowledge that we bring our humanity to looking at images, right? Our perspectives, our lineages, our histories intersect when we are viewing these images, right? And that then gets imparted and projected onto the image. And then we make meaning from that as an individual and today as a collective. So I just wanted to have us give Barnabas again a round of applause. And give yourselves a round of applause. Come on. It's early on a Wednesday morning,